You have a building that's 50% occupied. And what we want to do, now I'm going to give you a quick background, which I haven't gave Jason on it. The building had a mortgage of $1.1 million, and it went into default, and along with a couple of other buildings. And the bank wanted to sell the building anyway. The current owners bought the mortgage for $1.1 million for $250,000, and they had the bank finance the mortgage. Now let me repeat that. Existing mortgage of $1.1 million that the existing owners bought from the bank and turned around and had the bank to finance the mortgage. So they owe the bank $250,000 plus $200,000 on another building, I think $450,000 or $550,000, something like that. And they're financing the building. They're financing a mortgage. The bank is giving them the money to buy their own mortgage back. Now I know that sounds crazy. So what we're going to do is discount the building at the end of the day and buy everything for $825,000. The ideal is that you're not going to put up any cash. We're going to do what you call a temporary land contract. We haven't went over those deals yet, but this will take me a few minutes. We're going to go over it, and then we're going to have discussions about it. I'm getting a little warm in here. You want to click that air conditioner back there for me? Are y'all warm too, or is it just me? It is? Just a little bit? So, this is the rent roll. These are current numbers. These are annualized numbers. Although it's 50% occupied, you don't put 50% vacancy. Assume that it is 95%, or in this case, our vacancy collection is 8%, which is pretty standard. We have operating expenses are reduced to taxes, so that brings it down. Our operating expenses on this property, and I'm going over this really quickly, comes to per unit. It's not on there, $3,700 a unit. We have a current net income of $130, $160 is when it's stabilized. That's when the numbers are stabilized. That means it's full and the normal rents. The appraisers will go by the market rate rents. That's good news, not what you're charging. They go by the market rate rents. So we can finance this building and borrow $1.2 million and buy everything. So what happens? You got initial closing, $30,000 cash down. $30,000 cash on a deal for $1.3 million is 2% down, 2.25% down. $30,000 down, $1.2 million mortgage is going to get discounted. We got a broker's deferred commission of $120,000 to absorb the cash, because we know at the end of the day the seller's only getting $825,000. We don't care. So we got to absorb this either by additional credits like repair credits, or you can put it on the fee. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not really getting $120,000, but I can take, because the partnership would not allow me to get it. And then that means I don't have to pay any taxes. Two things. I could charge the fee, and if I'm a part of the joint venture or not, they could prohibit me from getting it, and as the cash flow come, you get it. That way you can use your fee. Property tax and other adjustments, $100,000. The seller going to carry a notice, $1,350,000. That's how they're going to come up and buy the property, with $30,000 cash and all credits. So we now will own the property 10 days from now. Final closing is borrow $1.2 million. So at the end of the day, the seller gets $80,000, the lender gets $10,000. There's a $30,000 fee. The real fee is $45,000. That's enough money. I'm not too greedy. $50,000 is a development fee that partners get. If Jason is signing as a guarantor, then he gets a fee. Title work, property tax and adjustment. This other property tax at $100 counts security deposits and a bunch of other stuff. This is for taxes. Repairs, it's $300,000 that we're going to put in the property. Fix it up with $300,000. He needs a couple hundred at least. He got plenty of money to fix it up. So there's a contingency of $52,000 and $1.2 million. What he's just done is bought the property with no money down. $352,000 we're going to have to pull out. But what do you think you're going to need to fix it up, truthfully? $200,000. So we're going to we're going to buy the property 100% without any cash whatsoever in it. And we're going to go over this deal and how we're going to do it. So it gets pretty clever. The land contract is called a temporary land contract. $250,000 down, $1.1 million land contract, $1.350 sale price. So what's the real deal? It's $30,000 cash, it's $120,000 fee, and it's $100,000 in adjustments. But they will never see the fee because they don't show fees on closing statements. They just show between the buyer and the seller. And what is settled off the closing statement is private. The bank will never, ever see it. So that's where you have your equity at that they can never, ever put their hands on. Because otherwise they found out we really didn't put any equity in. They said, you only put 30 in? When you're doing a deal, you got to think like the bank think up front. That's all you do. How is the bank going to look at this? How are they going to react to this? That's what you got to do. So you're going to get these, and what else you're going to get along with this, and I'm not going to go through it, I'm going to let you read it. It's the purchase agreement, how it would be put together. We got an amendment for a land contract. And then I'm going to send over a temporary land contract so you see the formation of what a temporary land contract is. And then I want you to go through it and study it, because next week I'm going to drill down. It'll just be us next week, and I'm drilling down. Okay, so I'm not going to take any questions right now because we have a great class today, ladies and gentlemen. I am very proud to tell you something. You can look in the mirror and say who you're going to be like in the future. We have Daron Saunders in the class, and Daron was one of the very first students in one of my very first classes. I think Daron graduated from Michigan State, and he came out. But I like Daron to spend about 25 or 30 minutes, tell us all about yourself, and to give everybody some time to ask some questions. We like to know how it is. Everyone around this table, Daron, these are the future developers in Detroit, and they like to know how it is being you. What do? I mean, tell us about your big deals, maybe even your biggest deal. And just share some wisdom with us. Let's give him a hand, everybody. This is Daron Saunders.
So I'd like to introduce myself. My first and foremost primary job is being the father of three. I'm fortunate enough to have my oldest daughter, Christian Sanders. Say hello to everybody.
Hi, Christian.
I've got two other kids at home. My middle child is 5, Cameron Sanders, the girl, and my youngest child is Alexander, the boy. Been married for 13 years or so, and I'll actually go back further than that so I can hopefully give you a little bit of an understanding of my overall background. Someone asked me earlier this morning, where did I grow up at? And I grew up on 7 Mile and Evergreen, right across the street from Henry Ford High School. I remember, to this day, who was it that I was talking to earlier? Oh, it was you. So you went to Benny, I went to DePores. I remember before DePores, my mom sending me to St. Mary's of Retford, which wasn't too far from here, actually. In fact, I'm going to take my daughter by there before we go back home. And I remember very vividly having to do homework after school. And when a lot of the other kids in the neighborhood didn't have to do homework, and I was mad. But I'm thankful for that experience because it taught me a little bit about what you are doing today. I mean, think about how great of a day it is. You could be out boating. I know you're a great, lovely boater. We used to dock right next to you. You could be doing a number of things other than sitting in a class with Herb Strather learning about real estate or whatnot. But you're here doing homework, so to speak. So part of, I think, the overall theme of what I'd like to share with you today is just the diligence associated with getting to the next level. And this is a part of it. So grew up, born and raised in Detroit, went to St. Mary's of Retford grade school, then I went to St. Martin DePores High School. Tried to go to Cass Tech my freshman year, but coming out of parochial school, going to Cass Tech, as great of a school as it wasn't for me because I didn't have the discipline yet. I literally used to catch that 7 Mile Hamilton bus and keep on trekking all the way down to 1300 Bobian. And my daughter shouldn't hear this or whatnot, but I would skip school and go to Greektown and just hang out or whatnot. So my mom put me back in And that's what, I just saw on the,
Absolutely.
people are scared of
Absolutely.
Detroit and are scared of, the various things that come along with Detroit. But if you are able to see opportunity in disaster, then that's the individual that will really be successful. I mean, when everybody's chasing the same deal, and that's where we're finding ourselves now. Yeah. When we're looking at bidding for opportunities that other people are bidding against, then what? I mean, when you think about the concept of winning a bid, that means that you won the opportunity to pay the highest price for something than someone else.
That's what you did.
Yeah, that's exactly what you did.
did.
So in certain instances, we're finding ourselves being outbid by almost 2 times what we're willing to offer. Okay, you know what? If that means that you're the winner, then you can be the winner. That's no problem. So we actually look for opportunities. And a lot of times opportunities come on an off-market basis. And even though that was brokered, the broker that was brokered on that deal, he wasn't an apartment building broker.
Wasn't.
So as a result, it was kind of an off-market deal that Herb found out about, shared it with us, and it just ultimately made sense all the way around. Mm-hmm. So I know I probably went a little bit over, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of insight into our life, our story, or whatnot. And I'd love to hear your questions if you have any. Anything that I've mentioned or anything outside that you'd like to hear from me about, whatever. Questions?
Daron, just in 3 minutes, tell us the biggest deal you did, and just give us a description of the deal very briefly. Today, the biggest single transaction.
So the biggest single transaction that we did was actually an apartment building in Lansing. Oak Park Village was the previous name. We bought it for $36 million. It was a very interesting deal, and I was sharing with the gentleman that was sitting here next to me a moment ago, Terry. I was sharing with him, you always hear the cliche, think outside the box. I said, well, with Herb and guys like myself, the box doesn't even exist. I mean, there's not even a box. I mean, it's a prism or something. I mean, it's just like there's no box. And that's a testament to just really creative thinking. Because on that deal, we made an offer to Aimco, which owns some 100,000 units across the country or whatnot. And when my partner and I made the offer, we didn't know how we were going to come up with the money. The equity raised on that deal was more than either one of us had raised individually, let alone collectively together. But we knew that it was a good asset that represented something that we could do similar to Lakeview, where we can increase the rents over time because they had townhome units as opposed to just apartment units. Mm-hmm. And we knew that if we did a targeted rehabilitation program, targeted meaning instead of just going in and doing, just kind of a collage of different rehabilitation approaches, we were going to take the 2/3 of the property, which in this property was a 618 unit community. 2/3 were townhomes. We were going to literally go in every one of the townhome units and increase like the rent per square foot on it based on what we did. So we were going to change the cabinets out. We were going to do new light fixtures. We were going to do all kinds of upgrades. We were going to add dishwashers, etc. But part of the creativity that ended up having to come about with that, and it's just really necessity is the mother of invention. When we couldn't raise all of the money that we needed for this very high raise, we went to the sellers. Similar to how you probably share with your classes, and we asked them to hold paper. But they're like, oh no, we can't hold paper. We're a publicly traded company or whatnot, and the mortgage doesn't even allow for you to do that. So we read through all the documents, and literally, even though I'm not an attorney, I've grown to become one. Yeah. And I would encourage you to do the same over time. But I literally love reading documents and just devouring them, and I like to say, we not only dot our I's and cross our T's, but we like to dot our J's too. I mean, you literally go through and look at things with a fine-tooth comb. And we were able to find various loopholes that ultimately allowed us to present the sellers with a proposal that ultimately allowed them to stay in the deal to the tune of $3 million, but we paid them in as a partnership. That we included them in the partnership, right, so that we didn't have to encumber the property or anything like that. Right. But we worked out and crafted the partnership agreement such that they're actually our partners now. And we were able to get the deal, and they love us. I mean, it's been almost a year now. We've been sending them a check, every month or whatnot, and they're happy that they actually did the deal. And ultimately, they'll be paid out earlier than what they thought that they would and what we had agreed to. Okay. But that was the largest deal that we did. That's
cool. $36 million. Okay, I'm going to let you, the class, answer some questions now.
But if you have any questions,
if you're not speechless,
That question we got I missed it. You said you went to school for electrical engineering, but did you mention what you really want to do as your major instead of that?
I didn't. So I eventually ended up going back to school for business, which is really my passion. I ended up going to Wayne State to get my master's in business with an emphasis in finance. I love numbers, but I love finance is really what I enjoy. And real estate, although that has turned out to be my passion, it's just an opportunity for me to do what I love, which is work with numbers and finance and, you know, putting deal structures and things of that nature together. I always wanted to go to law school. When she turns 18, I'll probably go back just to, you know, do something. But that's one of my passions as well, is combing through documents and figuring out how to make things work and using that as a means to do so.
Mm-hmm.
I think you had a question.
Yeah. I think on one of the smaller, I think it's a 60 unit, you purchased it.
Yes.
And then after a few years, you sold it. What went into that? I mean, you must have thought it was a good idea when you purchased it.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, or later, down the road, you said, I'm gonna sell it. So what went into that decision to sell after you originally bought it?
Yeah, great question. So I want to make sure I understand it correctly. Were you talking about the 6 unit or the 60 unit?
No, 60. The
60?
one-
He
yeah.
hasn't sold it yet.
So we actually still own that 60 unit. Looking to sell it, but I'll answer the question for the 6
Well, there was
unit.
another unit, though, that you purchased, and at some point, within a few years, you sold it. Well, that's what I understood.
You mean the 1031 exchange? You were telling me about the 10, that was the house.
Mhm. Well, the one that I did with her in
Yeah,
Farmington
yeah,
Hills, I'll give you what I think I hope you're looking for, and I'll just give you kind of the psychology behind why we choose to sell at certain
Because that's really what I'm,
certain times.
because normally people purchase something, they go through this long analysis, think that's a good deal, I'll purchase it.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years from now, they normally don't, unless there's something changed, or,
Yeah.
and I was just wondering what was it that caused you going in one direction, and apparently you saw something that caused you to go in another direction, I was just wondering.
Yeah, great question. So I'll answer it in a couple different ways. The answer actually depends on the asset, but I'll give you 3 examples that I hope will give you kind of some insight. For the 6-unit apartment building, when we looked to sell that, it was primarily because at that point in time, we had increased our level of scale. We had started buying larger buildings with an emphasis on 200 to 400 unit communities. And the organizational structure that is built up, that manages the 200 unit to 400 unit property, is a lot different than the organizational structure that we had when it was just my wife and I that was built up.
Basically.
Just, yeah,
Right.
too small. Not that it wasn't profitable, because on a per unit basis, the smaller assets are actually much more profitable than the larger ones. But part of as we started scaling and growing, my rule of thumb is if I can't afford to pay a manager at any given property of mine $40,000 or more, then that's not a property that I really want. And that's where it is right now. It doesn't mean that other assets aren't, good assets or whatnot. But for me, I want to have someone that's at least worth that kind of salary, because they're going to handle all the problems associated with that particular asset.
Otherwise, you have to almost end up handling them yourself.
Exactly.
Or getting involved or getting a high level executive to do it, and is it worth it at that point?
Yeah. And then, so the property that that Herb helped us on the transaction with, that was totally different. I mean, we could have kept that forever, and I'm sure if we would have kept it, 2 years now, and would have been looking to sell now, we probably would have made even more than what
Yep.
we made.
Mm-hmm.
However, from our perspective, we saw the market shifting, and if you think about it, things started getting a little bit better than what they were in 2008, right around 2011 or so. I mean, the economy
Yeah.
generally started getting a little bit better, and people started feeling better, and things of that nature. So we saw that and said, you know what? Even if we leave a little bit of money on the table, meaning that even if we could potentially sell it at a later date and get more money, we'd rather strike now. And another component of why we decided to sell was because when we're looking at passing that hat around to our institutional investors, a big thing that we run into now, even to this day, is being young and not having as much of a track record as some of the older, more established companies, and in effect not having gone through a full investment cycle. Full investment cycle meaning you bought it, you fixed it up, you managed it, you increased the value, and you sold it. So we wanted to be able to check that box that disallowed effectively, the big brokerage houses that, provide private equity and smaller private equity shops with money. We wanted to be able to check it and say, nope, we bought and sold and went through that full investment cycle.
Very good, very
So it's
good.
almost like a part of your overall strategy. In other words, you wanted to build a track record, so it may have been better for you to maybe, like you say, leave money on the table and build a track record, because that was gonna allow you to do something bigger.
Correct. Now, have you guys talked about IRRs? Internal rate of return?
Returns, not really. We've just been talking about cash flows. In
Okay.
other words, we're doing some syndication when we get into it, but we haven't really done that much syndication.
Okay.
Most of this class is talking about leveraging.
Okay.
Just leveraging the asset and without having to put up a lot of cash. That's the primary goal.
Okay, all right.
But I am glad that you pointed out the difference on those smaller units and your organization being set up to handle larger units, because I've been trying to explain that to a few people. You understand?
Yeah, it just
Your
we
approach.
can't manage them as efficiently as we used to. I mean, literally, when I was going to Home Depot, I
You
didn't
do it
have to
yourself.
pay anyone $40,000-$50,000 a year. I would
You
do
were
it
it.
myself. I mean, literally, my wife, when she was pregnant with this one, used to help me change out light fixtures and things of that nature. I mean, and does it to this day better than I do. But as you start growing the organization and you have staff and health insurance and things of that nature, it's a beast. You have,
Regarding your properties, is there special circumstances with insurance or insurers, or do you self-insure any one of the entities?
so great question. We don't currently self-insure, although we're looking into it. And looking into it with a pool of other investors like ourselves. Right now, we have two go-to insurance agents that we go to that basically go out for bids once a year, usually 90 or 120 days in advance of when the policy expires. And then we'll look at the grid and compare apples to apples. And it's not always given to the one that has the cheapest premium. A lot of times, especially in Detroit, you want to get coverage with whoever you can, but then you also want to get certain exclusions not excluded. I mean, I've got certain properties where if I had really looked at the fine print, I wouldn't have allowed certain exclusions to have existed in the policy.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Ron, out of curiosity, do you find this part of your investment structure to kind of basically sell certain properties in order to grow so that you can do bigger acquisitions? So it's kind of, I know that you said you got rid of the ones that was too small, but even with some of the larger ones, would you be willing to sell those so that you could acquire a bigger property the next time around?
Yeah.
And grow your overall net worth at the same time.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, and that's a great point. We definitely
Please come
do
up
look
and
to
go to the
sell
store.
to grow. And when I first started buying buildings, I literally used to fall in love with them. I mean, I would say, you know what, before I even had kids, I'm going to have that for my grandkids and this and that or whatnot. And I would just say this. And I love architecture. I love building. I love literally seeing things come out of the ground and say to myself, wow, that wasn't there. Now it is. I mean, like the whole construction process. I love it. I really do. But I don't fall in love with buildings anymore. I mean, and if I literally bought this thing from her right now for $1 and you told me you buy it from me for $2,
It's gone.
Sold, it's gone.
There you
And
go.
that's just how it is. I mean, now there's a little bit more calculation into that based on the strategy or whatnot. Part of the path to growth also includes making sure that the net worth is at a certain level. We have to have certain liquidity at all times, otherwise we'll violate certain covenants. So even if I don't put a dime into to the properties that we invest in, I've got to have the liquidity that's able to show the bank that I have the wherewithal to do this or that or whatnot. So even if I pass that hat around, they still want to look at me and know that I've got X amount of dollars in the bank, not encumbered whatsoever. It's got to be cash. So certainly to your point, we definitely have a strategy to sell to buy.
Right. One other thing that I'd like to point out, if there are no more questions, there's one thing that was very key. Daron mentioned to you that the properties now are very expensive. Now, obviously, he buys in the suburbs, he buys outstate in other places. You have some properties in Florida? Do you?
No, not in Florida
no,
yet.
Okay. Now, in Detroit, we're lucky. because it's still psychologically depressed. When you say cap rates, tell the class what cap rates that you're looking at, Daron, so they will understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so, and everybody understands what a cap rate is? Okay. So it's something that I look at very closely, almost daily. And I look at cap rates on a sub-market basis. So you can have a property in Farmington Hills on 10 Mile and Middle Belt, the property that I referenced earlier. That's, I would say right now probably about a 7.25, 7.5 cap rate. You can go 2 miles north and have a cap rate that's a quarter of a point, maybe even a half a point lower than that. You come to Detroit, and I mean, I had an appraisal done on one of our properties. This was some years or so ago, but they assigned a 15% cap rate
Which
to
is
it.
outrageous.
I mean, outrageous.
see
But
what
in
I'm talking
general, I
about?
think, Detroit's probably, if you exclude the downtown, midtown, hot pockets or whatnot, is probably about a 10% cap rate or thereabout.
Roughly 10%.
Roughly 10%. The thing that I love about Detroit, and if we were set up, we would buy much more property than what we are, is that, if you think about the definition of a cap rate, it's really a measure of risk or perceived risk. And you guys sitting in this class have the ability to reduce that risk very systematically and with all of what you're sharing with them. So even though to the outside world, and this is what we see in Michigan, if I look at it from a broader perspective, from an outside perspective, if you have anybody coming from New York, Miami, any of the coastal states, they look at a 7.5%
That's
cap
high.
rate as compared to a 4 or 3.5% cap rate that they're buying things at. So that's why it's hard for me to
It's
compete even in the Michigan
unbelievable.
market.
South of 5% cap rates, and I'm telling you, our cap rate is 9 and 10% that we have. There's tremendous opportunities. Now, the better Detroit, as Detroit improves, the risk factors go down. You understand? The desirability, the equity doesn't have to be so high because the debt rate is pretty fixed. You understand? What's going to control a lot of that is the actual equity rate itself. Instead of you needing 15%, you could take 12% and factor it in.
Yeah.
Now, what also measures this whole thing is the comps too. The prices of what other properties. So that can kind of cool it down because one thing about it, if you had a skinny cap rate based on the debt rate being low, it's a risky deal. Because 5 years from now, you can have a balloon, and then what you're going to do if rates went up. Think about it. If you finance something at the 4.5% rate, this is very, very low. 5 years from now, we could be sitting at a 7% interest rate, which is average. Kind of our average interest rate is around 7. So, I mean, at one point, I remember when the interest rate the bank loaned you, I got a brand new mortgage from First Federal, and the rate was 12%. And that was the prime, that's the best rate you can get. You understand what I mean? So cap rates, we have a play in cap rates that's off the hook right now. So as the city improves, the cap rates are gonna drop, so our values are gonna just jump. So we have a chance, because it's psychological, that we can take and buy properties, really over leverage them. Not over leverage them, but we could buy them with 100% leverage without being over leveraged. Still have 150% debt coverage. And buy property and buy property without having to put cash in. So that's very good. Let's give a round of hand, y'all. Ron, we just thank you very, very much. And you brought Christian. It's wonderful. I just keep thinking she do look like you, but her mother must be beautiful. You understand?
She is.
Yes, I can appreciate that.
Yeah,
so we thank you. You are definitely an alumnus, and we are doing deals with Daron. The Apple Eye deal. This is maybe our guy right here, and keep that Joy Road. Just keep it soft. We'll be back to it very closely, very soon.
All right. Thank you all.
Yes.